One unspoken moment of tension blurred the lines between us, transforming a simple invitation into something impossible to ignore. It wasn't anything grand, a casual, offhand suggestion after we'd finished an intense gym session. "You up for a sauna?" she asked, tossing me a towel with that lazy grin, the kind of look that hinted she had all the time in the world. I felt a small thrill at the question, maybe because it caught me off guard, or maybe because it was her asking. The day had been long and surprisingly humid, with clouds thick enough to mute the sun but not enough to ease the heavy air. But there we were, already a little sweaty from our workout, winding down with a comfortable silence hanging between us. "Sure, why not?" I replied, trying to play it cool. I followed her down the hall, the sound of our footsteps echoing lightly in the mostly empty gym. I kept my expression casual, but I could feel a flutter of excitement, like this was something out of the ordinary. Maybe it was the fact that we rarely spent time alone, just the two of us. Or maybe it was something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The sauna door creaked as she opened it, and the wave of thick, hot air hit us like a wall. I hesitated, feeling the intensity of the heat, but she shot me a glance that said, "Come on." So I stepped in behind her. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with that familiar, almost comforting scent of wood and steam. I took a seat on the lower bench, aware of how small the room felt with just the two of us in it. She settled in across from me, leaning back with a relaxed sigh. For a moment, we just sat there. The only sound the soft hiss of steam from the stones and the rhythmic beat of my own heart, suddenly loud in my ears. I could feel the warmth seeping into my muscles, and with it, an odd sense of ease that seemed to relax all the tension I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Long day?" she asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was low, almost lost in the warmth of the room, and I nodded, keeping my gaze fixed on a knot in the wood paneling next to her. "Yeah, one of those days," I replied, half smiling. But there was something else I wasn't saying, something I wouldn't admit even to myself. There had always been this quiet, unspoken thing between us, a spark I'd ignored, pushed aside, pretending it wasn't there. She looked over at me, eyes half closed, as if she were reading my thoughts. "I get that," she murmured, her tone carrying something unspoken. There was an odd pause, and she broke eye contact, leaning back and closing her eyes. I sat there in silence, trying to shake off the strange energy filling the room. The heat was getting to me, blurring my thoughts, making everything feel surreal, almost dreamlike. I closed my eyes, letting myself sink into the sensation of the heat against my skin, the soft, steady sound of her breathing just a few feet away. Suddenly, I felt a light nudge on my foot. I opened my eyes, startled, and looked at her. She was grinning, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Bet you can't handle it up here?" she said, motioning to the higher bench where she sat. It was a playful challenge, one that instantly woke up that competitive side in me. I rolled my eyes, but I got up, climbing up to sit next to her. The heat was intense, almost overwhelming at first, but I forced myself to stay calm, to ignore the growing nervous energy between us. "Not bad," she said, smirking. "But can you handle this?" She leaned in, close enough that I could feel the heat of her skin against mine. My heart was racing now, and I wasn't sure if it was from the heat or the sudden closeness. But I forced a laugh, pushing her back lightly, trying to hide how flustered I felt. "Relax," I muttered, rolling my eyes again, but she didn't move away. If anything, she seemed closer, her arm brushing against mine, her leg pressed lightly against my own. I could feel every point of contact, the heat magnified in the steamy room, and suddenly the air felt too thick, too heavy. She shifted slightly, leaning back but still close, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought she was going to say something, but she just sat there, looking at me with that same unreadable expression. A flicker of something in her eyes I couldn't quite interpret. Was it curiosity? Amusement? Something else entirely? Whatever it was, it left me feeling off balance, unsure of myself. I cleared my throat, trying to break the tension. "So, you come here often?" I asked, the question awkward and out of place, but it was the best I could manage. She chuckled, shaking her head. "Not really. Usually I just hit the weights and leave. But today..." She trailed off, glancing at me out of the corner of her eye. "Today felt like a sauna kind of day, I guess." There was a pause, and I felt a shiver run down my spine despite the heat. I didn't know what she meant by that, but it felt loaded, like there was something she wasn't saying, something lingering just beneath the surface. The silence stretched between us, thick and charged. I wanted to say something, to break the tension, but my mind was blank. All I could focus on was the closeness of her, the way her presence seemed to fill the room, overwhelming and inescapable. Then, out of nowhere, she reached over, resting her hand on my knee. It was a casual gesture, almost friendly, but it sent a jolt of electricity through me. My mind went blank, and for a moment, all I could do was stare at her hand, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked up at her, my breath catching in my throat, but she didn't move her hand. She just looked back at me, her expression unreadable, her eyes dark and intense. There was a challenge in her gaze, a dare, and I felt myself drawn in, unable to look away. My mind was racing, 1,000 thoughts swirling around, but none of them made any sense. All I knew was that in that moment, something had shifted between us, something I couldn't ignore any longer. But then, just as quickly as she'd reached out, she pulled her hand away, leaning back with a casual shrug, as if nothing had happened. I let out a shaky breath, trying to regain my composure, but I could still feel the imprint of her hand on my skin, the memory of her touch lingering like a ghost. "Maybe we should head out," she said, breaking the silence. Her tone was light, almost playful, but I could sense an edge to it, something that hinted at more. I nodded, barely able to trust myself to speak, and followed her out of the sauna, the cool air hitting me like a slap in the face. We didn't say much as we got dressed, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. I felt like I was walking in a daze, my mind still trying to process what had happened, what it meant. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, to pretend it was nothing, but another part of me knew that something had changed, something I couldn't ignore. As we walked out of the gym, she shot me a sidelong glance, a small, knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Same time next week?" she asked, her tone casual, but there was a hint of something in her voice, a suggestion, a promise. I nodded, feeling my pulse quicken. "Yeah," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. And as we parted ways, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, that there was more to come. After that day at the gym, something had shifted, even if neither of us acknowledged it outright. Every time I thought about it, about her sitting there in the sauna, that look in her eyes, I felt a strange mix of nerves and excitement. And as much as I tried to ignore it, to pretend that day had been like any other, it lingered in the back of my mind, whispering questions I didn't dare answer. The next week, I found myself standing outside the gym doors, checking the time on my phone. It was a little early, and she wasn't here yet. The normal buzz of activity in the gym seemed louder than usual. Every sound amplified as I waited, my heart thumping a little too hard. I leaned against the wall, trying to look casual, but my thoughts kept drifting back to that last tense moment we shared. Finally, she arrived, nodding at me with a faint smile. "Hey," she said, her tone light but guarded. "Hey." My voice came out quieter than I'd intended, but I forced a smile, trying to keep things normal. Yet the moment we were together, the silence between us felt thick, like there were 100 unspoken things pressing down, waiting to spill out. We moved through our workout, sticking to the usual routines. But there was an edge to everything. Our banter felt more cautious, like we were both waiting for the other to bring up what had happened. But no one did, and I could feel the weight of it all pressing down, the tension mounting with every passing minute. When we were done, she grabbed a towel, wiping the sweat from her forehead before glancing at me with a sly grin. So, sauna. The word hung between us, loaded with meaning. I hesitated for a split second, feeling my pulse race, but I nodded. Yeah, why not? We made our way down the hall, walking side by side in silence. I could feel my nerves buzzing, a sense of anticipation curling in my stomach. The heat hit us as we stepped inside, enveloping us in that familiar warmth, and we took our seats, me on the lower bench, her on the upper, just like last time. But now, even sitting in silence felt like a conversation, one we weren't ready to have. For a few minutes we sat there, the steam thick in the air, until finally she leaned forward, breaking the quiet. "So, last time," she began, her voice careful, "was that weird? I looked up at her surprised. Her face was unreadable, her eyes trained on a spot on the wall, avoiding my gaze. I swallowed, searching for the right words. I guess it was a little unexpected, I replied, keeping my tone light, though I felt anything but. She nodded, her face still serious, and for a moment I thought she was going to leave it at that. But she looked down at me, her gaze intense, like she was searching for something. Maybe I crossed a line, she said softly, almost to herself. I felt my heart thud painfully in my chest, my mind racing with everything I wanted to say. But instead, I forced a laugh, shrugging it off. It's fine, really. She didn't look convinced, and the silence between us grew heavier, the heat intensifying everything. After a moment, she leaned back, exhaling a slow breath. I don't want things to be tense between us, she murmured, her voice barely audible over the soft hiss of the steam. I nodded, feeling a pang of relief mixed with something else, something I couldn't quite name. Me neither. For a moment, it felt like we'd reached some sort of understanding, like we could just brush it off and move on. But as the minutes passed, the tension crept back in, settling between us like a shadow we couldn't shake. I could feel her gaze on me every now and then, lingering just a little too long. And every time our eyes met, I felt that same flutter of excitement mixed with nerves. When we finally left the sauna, the cool air hit me like a shock, but it did nothing to clear my head. We got dressed in silence, the unspoken tension following us all the way out of the gym. As we walked outside, she turned to me, her expression serious. You want to grab a drink or something? I hesitated, caught off guard. But the way she looked at me, like she was holding back something she couldn't say, made it hard to refuse. Sure, I replied, nodding. We ended up at a small, dimly lit bar a few blocks from the gym, tucked away from the usual crowds. The low hum of conversation filled the air, the faint glow of neon lights casting soft shadows on the walls. We found a booth in the corner, ordering a couple of drinks and settling into an uneasy silence. For a while, we made small talk, skirting around the tension that seemed to thicken with every passing minute. But eventually, the drinks started to kick in, loosening our nerves, and the conversation flowed more easily. We laughed, joked, reminiscing about old times and sharing stories we hadn't thought about in years. But even as we laughed, I could feel the tension lingering just beneath the surface, a current pulling us closer, drawing us into something I wasn't sure I was ready for. And as the night wore on, that current grew stronger, almost impossible to ignore. At one point, she looked at me, her gaze steady, piercing. You know, she said softly, leaning forward, I never really expected, any of this. I felt my heart skip a beat, my pulse racing as I met her gaze. Me neither, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a moment of silence, the air between us thick with anticipation. I could feel the weight of her gaze, the unspoken questions hanging between us. And I realized with a sinking feeling that there was no going back. Not after this. She reached across the table, her hand hovering over mine for a split second before she pulled back, hesitating. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the struggle she was going through, and I felt a strange mix of sympathy and something else, something deeper. Before I could stop myself, I reached out, resting my hand over hers. The touch was light, almost tentative, but it was enough to break the dam that had been holding back everything we hadn't said. Her eyes softened, and for a moment, we just sat there, caught in a quiet understanding that felt both thrilling and terrifying. As the night went on, the conversation grew quieter, more intimate, each word bringing us closer to that unspoken line. And as we left the bar, the tension between us was palpable, an invisible thread pulling us together. We walked in silence, our footsteps echoing softly on the empty streets, and I could feel her presence beside me, steady and comforting. When we finally reached my place, she stopped, looking at me with that same intense gaze. You sure you're okay with all this? She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. I nodded, feeling my heart race as I looked up at her. Yeah, I replied, my voice steady. I'm sure. She hesitated, searching my face for a moment, and then, without another word, she leaned in, her forehead resting gently against mine. We stood there, our breaths mingling in the cool night air, and I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. a quiet acceptance of everything that had brought us to this moment. But the tension was still there, an undercurrent of excitement that kept my pulse racing, and as we stood there, I knew this was only the beginning. There was so much left unspoken, so much we hadn't yet acknowledged, and the weight of it all pressed down on me, filling me with a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. "Guess I'll see you around," she murmured, her voice low and hesitant. "Yay," I replied, feeling a pang of disappointment as she pulled back, her hand lingering on mine for just a moment before she let go. But as she walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over, that there was more to come, more than either of us was ready to admit. And as I watched her disappear into the night, I felt a quiet resolve settle over me. I didn't know where this was going or what would happen next, but I knew one thing for certain. There was no turning back. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. The days that followed felt surreal. Every moment was colored by that night outside my place. The quiet closeness we'd shared, lingering like a half-remembered dream. It was impossible to focus, to pretend that everything was normal. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the edge of something vast and uncharted, each passing day only amplifying that sense of anticipation. I hadn't seen her since, but her absence was anything but soothing. Instead, it stirred something inside me, a quiet yearning I couldn't name. My thoughts drifted back to the way she'd looked at me, her forehead against mine, our breaths mingling in the cool air. Every time I remembered it, I felt a pang of something deep and unsettling, a spark that wouldn't fade. Just when I was beginning to think I'd imagined the whole thing, my phone buzzed, her name lighting up the screen. "Want to grab dinner tonight?" The message was casual, but my heart raced as I typed out my response, trying to play it cool. "Sure. What time?" That evening, I found myself outside the same small restaurant where we'd met before, my heart pounding as I waited for her. When she arrived, she looked calm, a faint smile playing at the corners of her mouth as she walked over, hands in her pockets. "Hey," she said softly, her eyes meeting mine. "Hey." I smiled back, trying to ignore the flutter of nerves building in my chest. We went inside, settling into a booth near the back. The restaurant was dimly lit, the soft glow of candles casting shadows that danced along the walls. It felt intimate, the kind of place where secrets were shared, and for a moment I wondered if she'd chosen it on purpose. Dinner started off light. Casual conversation, a few laughs. But as the night went on, the mood shifted. Our voices grew softer, our laughter quieter, and soon we were both leaning in, our heads close as we talked, as if there were things only the two of us could understand. There was an intensity in her gaze that left me breathless, a quiet confidence that made everything feel charged, electric. At one point, she paused, her hand resting on the table just inches from mine. Her eyes lingered on me, searching, and I could feel the warmth of her skin, so close it made my heart skip a beat. The candlelight caught in her eyes, illuminating flecks of amber I'd never noticed before. Her lips curved into a subtle smile, and I found myself fixated on their soft fullness, wondering how they might feel against mine. "Do you ever wonder?" she started, but her voice trailed off, as if she were weighing her words. "Wonder what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, leaning in closer, drawn to her like a magnet. She looked away, a faint smile on her lips. "Nothing. Forget it." But her fingers traced lazy circles on the tablecloth, inching closer to mine, a silent invitation that sent shivers across my skin. The question hung between us, filling the silence with a tension so thick I could almost feel it. We sat there for a moment, neither of us speaking, until she finally took a deep breath, breaking the spell. "Want to go for a walk?" she asked, her tone casual, but there was something in her eyes that told me this wasn't just a simple invitation. I nodded, my pulse quickening as I followed her outside. The night was cool and quiet, the streets nearly empty as we walked side by side, the city lights casting a warm glow on the pavement. Her perfume drifted in the air between us, something subtle and intoxicating with notes of vanilla and sandalwood. Our hands brushed occasionally, each accidental touch sending electricity through my veins. Eventually, we reached a small park, the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze, the only sound around us. We stopped by a bench near the edge of a pond, the water dark and still, reflecting the stars scattered across the night sky. She sat down, and after a moment's hesitation, I joined her, the quiet intimacy of the moment wrapping around us like a blanket. For a while we just sat there, the silence stretching between us, filled with a tension that was both thrilling and terrifying. I could feel her presence beside me, steady and warm, and every so often our arms would brush, sending a delicious shiver down my spine. The moonlight cast soft shadows across her face, highlighting her high cheekbones and the elegant curve of her neck. I found myself wondering how her skin might taste, how it would feel beneath my fingertips. Then, without warning, she turned to me, her gaze intent. "You know, I've been thinking about us," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. The night air suddenly felt electric, charged with possibility. My heart skipped a beat, my mind racing as I tried to process her words. I searched her face, trying to understand, but all I could see was that same quiet intensity, that same unspoken question hanging in the air. Her lips parted slightly, and I couldn't help but stare, imagining how they might feel against my skin. "Yeah," I replied, barely able to keep my voice steady, my body humming with anticipation. She nodded, her eyes never leaving mine. For a moment she seemed to hesitate, as if she were holding back, but then she reached out, her hand grazing mine, a touch so light it felt like a whisper. My breath caught, my heart pounding as I felt the warmth of her fingers against my skin. The simple contact sent waves of warmth throughout my body, making me ache for more. Before I knew what was happening, she leaned in, her face inches from mine, her breath warm against my cheek. I could smell the faint wine on her breath, mingling with the scent of her perfume. "Is this okay?" she murmured, her voice barely audible, husky with desire. I nodded, my words lost somewhere in the back of my throat. I could feel my pulse racing, my mind going blank as she closed the distance between us, her lips brushing mine in a kiss that was soft, tentative, as if she were testing the waters. But the moment our lips touched, something inside me ignited, a spark that had been smoldering for far too long. Her lips were impossibly soft, moving against mine with a gentleness that made my heart ache. I reached up, threading my fingers through her silky hair, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened. She tasted like wine and something sweeter, something uniquely her, and I felt myself drowning in the sensation. Her hand found my waist, her touch firm but gentle, grounding me as the world seemed to spin around us. Our bodies swayed together, lost in the tender embrace. Her gentle fingers caressed my skin, unleashing emotions I hadn't anticipated. Excitement, fear, and sweet relief all mingling together into something overwhelmingly beautiful. Her touch was knowing, confident, the touch of a woman who understood desire and how to nurture it slowly, deliberately. Time froze. The world dissolved, leaving only our entwined hearts. The night air caressed our skin, the distant sounds of the city fading away until there was nothing but her. Her scent, her touch, the soft sounds of pleasure that escaped her lips as our kiss deepened. Silence enveloped us, thrilling yet comforting in its intimacy. Her soft touch mesmerized me. Her fingers traced delicate patterns along my arm, my shoulder, the curve of my jaw. With every passing moment, our connection deepened, something profound and unspoken passing between us. I melted into her embrace, surrendering to feelings I denied for too long. Our hearts beat as one, the rhythm steady and sure. In her arms, I found something I hadn't realized I was searching for: acceptance, desire, and the promise of something more. But then she pulled back, her gaze steady as she looked at me, her eyes dark and filled with something deep and unspoken. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, matching my own quickened breathing. "I wasn't sure if you'd be okay with this," she admitted, her voice soft, vulnerable in a way I hadn't heard before. I managed a small smile, my heart still racing, my lips tingling from her kiss. "Neither was I replied, feeling a pang of honesty. "But I don't regret it." My fingers traced the delicate line of her collarbone, marveling at the softness of her skin, the gentle curve of her shoulder. A faint smile tugged at the corners of her mouth, and she reached for my hand, lacing her fingers with mine. Her thumb traced small circles on my palm, each movement sending ripples of pleasure up my arm. We sat there, the silence between us comfortable, the tension that had been building for so long finally easing, leaving only a quiet sense of understanding and simmering desire. As we sat there, her hand warm in mine, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace, like everything had finally fallen into place. There was no need for words, no need to explain what had just happened. It was enough just to be here, together, in this quiet, stolen moment, the promise of more hanging in the air between us. Eventually, she glanced at me, her expression soft, tender in a way that made my heart flutter. Want to head back? The question was simple, but loaded with implication. I nodded, still holding her hand as we stood up. We walked in silence, our hands intertwined, her thumb occasionally stroking my skin in a way that sent shivers of anticipation through me. For once, there was no need to fill the silence with words. Everything we needed to say had already been spoken, even if we hadn't said it out loud. When we reached my door, she paused, her hand lingering in mine as she looked at me, her expression a mix of hope and uncertainty. The porch light cast a warm glow across her face, highlighting the delicate curves and angles that I now wanted to memorize with my fingertips. So, I guess I'll see you soon? There was a question in her voice, a vulnerability that made me want to pull her close and never let go. I nodded, my smile matching hers. Yeah, soon. The word felt like a promise, heavy with meaning and possibility. She gave my hand a gentle squeeze before letting go, her gaze lingering on me for a moment before she leaned in again, pressing her lips to mine in a kiss that was both tender and filled with unspoken longing. This time, there was a confidence to her touch, a certainty that hadn't been there before. Her hand cupped my cheek, her thumb brushing lightly across my skin, and I found myself leaning into her touch, craving more. When she finally pulled away, her eyes were dark with desire, reflecting emotions that mirrored my own. She tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, her fingers lingering on my cheek. "Good night," she whispered, her voice husky. "Good night," I replied, watching as she turned to leave, her silhouette gradually fading into the darkness. The memory of her touch, her taste, her scent remained, wrapping around me like a comforting embrace. That night, I lay in bed, my thoughts drifting back to the park, to the softness of her kiss, the warmth of her hand in mine. My fingers traced my lips, still sensitive from her touch, and I could almost feel her presence beside me, the phantom weight of her body against mine. I knew this was just the beginning, that there was still so much left unspoken, so many desires yet to be fulfilled. But for now, it was enough. And as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but smile, knowing that whatever happened next, we would face it together, our hearts and bodies finally aligned in a dance we'd both been yearning for. After that night, things between us shifted subtly but unmistakably. Every interaction felt charged, like a secret thread connected us, invisible yet undeniable. We'd spend time together as if nothing had changed, but every shared glance, every brush of our hands, hinted at something deeper. I told myself I was overthinking it, that maybe it wasn't as serious as I thought. But deep down, I knew I was only fooling myself. Days blurred into weeks, and it seemed we'd perfected the art of keeping things casual, of pretending we were still just friends. But the quiet moments, the ones that came when it was just us, the world falling away, spoke louder than words ever could. Like the night she'd brushed a stray hair behind my ear as we laughed over an old movie. Her touch lingering a second too long, her fingertips tracing the curve of my ear, her eyes darkening as they met mine. Those moments left me breathless, aching for more. But as much as I wanted to savor the moments we had, there was an undercurrent of tension I couldn't ignore. She never spoke about what we were, never acknowledged what lay between us beyond the occasional kiss, the lingering glances, the stolen touches in moments of privacy. And maybe, in a way, that was enough. But doubts gnawed at me, whispering questions I wasn't sure I wanted answers to. In the end, I realized that sometimes love isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to let go, when to allow yourself to heal, to grow. And though our story hadn't ended the way I'd hoped, it was a story worth telling, a journey worth remembering, a testament to those moments when we dare to cross boundaries, to explore the uncharted territories of our hearts, even when we know the path ahead might lead to heartbreak. Because sometimes, even the briefest connections can leave an indelible mark on our souls, changing us in ways we never expected.